And so let's begin again, as we do always, with a brief meditation. And so getting the body into a comfortable posture with the back straight. And gently allowing our awareness to descend into the space of the body, observing all the physical sensations arising throughout the body. And if we find any points of tension or discomfort, then using the out breath as an opportunity to relax and release the space into the place where we feel tension. And we can take 3 deep breaths. And then simply allowing the breathing to rejoin its natural rhythm without forcing or manipulating the breath in any way, as we settle more and more deeply into the stillness and the silence. And settling the mind by releasing all concerns, hopes, and fears to do with the past and the future, and simply allowing the mind to rest happily in the present moment for this brief meditation. And having prepared the body and mind in this way, we can turn our attention to the breath, focusing on the physical sensations of the breath, either at the level of the abdomen or with the sensations of the air coming in and out of the nose. And simply allowing our awareness to rest there, observing the entire duration of the breath, from beginning to end and on to the next, in a continuity of mindfulness. And if we find ourselves distracted by sounds or thoughts, then using the out breath as an opportunity to relax, release the distraction, and return our awareness to the breath again and again. And gently relaxing our awareness on the breath. Okay. So yesterday we began looking at this first kind of route to happiness, as I've called it, or rather this first method by which we attain a certain level of happiness, right? Because we saw that in terms of this shamatha meditation or this placement meditation, then really we're looking to deal with all this extra kind of junk that tends to live in our mind because of our inappropriate mental attention, if you like, or simply because of our mind being very scattered, right? So this meditation of shamatha is aiming to develop this skill of concentration, to hone in this skill such that we are able to concentrate for longer and longer periods of time. And not only that, but in particular, have control over what we pay attention to and not pay attention to, right? We tend to think that we kind of just have to go along with whatever arises, and if there's a sound, we have to pay attention to it. If something comes along, it kind of grabs us. It really feels like it's grabbing us, and we're kind of helpless to give it some kind of attention. But actually, it's our mind, right? And it's our choice what we pay attention to and not pay attention to. It's just a matter of habit and having that kind of mental strength of being able to sustain the concentration on a certain place at will. So this is kind of the goal of this type of meditation. And with that comes a great deal of mental happiness, because as we're able to develop the concentration and reduce both the states of distraction, all these kind of different, that we call it the monkey mind, right? Because it jumps around, just grabbing everything. So this kind of very distracted mind, but also this very dull, kind of lethargic mind, as I don't want to do it, very kind of slow mind. Because again, we saw the distraction is kind of very active kind of a mind, but there's also the other side, which is the dullness kind of a mind. And those are corrected by means of developing those qualities of stability and clarity, or stability and vividness, right? Like that. As such that, as we continue to develop these states of mind, we give less time to these distractions. We give less time to these really kind of unimportant mental events that keep occurring in the mind, and which are actually draining a lot of our energy and wasting a lot of our time. And as we're going to see today, are also involved in getting us into all these different thought processes that are really not useful, that are really detrimental to our mental well-being. But even just without going on to the second step yet, even just this very first step is still really important in terms of calming down the mind, being able to have some level of control over what the mind is doing and where we're placing our attention on. Because then this becomes really the process also, if we bring it back in terms of the benefits for the other types of meditation, then this becomes the tool, like the process by which we sharpen the tool of our mind, right? I gave yesterday the analogy of, when scientists do research, they need very precise, very powerful tools to get the kind of data which allows them to make all these amazing discoveries, right? So likewise here, the tool for investigating our mind is our mind, right? The tool for investigating and working on our mind is the mind itself. So we need a very kind of sharp tool to do the investigation and the observation with. And so again, if we have a mind that is very scattered, or we have a mind which is very dull, then that's kind of a very blunt tool with which to engage in this kind of inquiry, which we're about to look at today. Whereas by developing these skills, we're able to reduce the level of noise and have more control over where we direct the mind, such that it becomes a much more powerful tool that is able to think in a much more directed manner. right? So, because we kind of know this also sometimes from experience. We're trying to think about something, but we keep wandering off and getting distracted onto other things, and we never manage to finish our trail of thought, right? And then that means that actually thinking about that isn't able to really affect the mind. Either we never get to the end of the thing we're trying to think about, we never finish that train of thought, or even if we do, by the time we do, we took so many side turns and we had so many distractions that it doesn't actually affect the mind very powerfully. It doesn't have a very powerful effect on the mind. And actually, we're much more likely to forget it later on. So in this way, this acts as a tool or a launch pad to now be able to go deeper and investigate. So let's begin looking at that. And there'll be a few more comments on this in a second, but let's begin. So just as a reminder that again, we're looking here at as meditation as a whole. And then yesterday we looked at this process of developing calm abiding. And so today we'll begin looking at the other side of what is called special insight or analytical meditations, right? Which again, as we saw, meditations that seek to analyze on the one hand, but also those that take the aspect using the imaginative part of the mind. So by now, I think in the meditation sessions with Felipe, you've kind of experienced both of those, if not all of these, in some form or another. But it's good to just kind of keep an eye out and understand which one is happening and when. So, so now when we are looking to engage in this analytical meditation, then of course there are many, many different things to meditate again about. But here, what I would really like to kind of dive right into the main point of things, which is that as we saw, the main problem that we are dealing with, the mind, is these various types of mental afflictions, as we call them, the mental disturbing emotions, afflictions. There's a variety of names that you might see in different literature. But as we said before, what they have in common is this quality, one of disturbing the mind, right? The minute they arise, they kind of disturb the mind. The mind is not really able to relax and be calm and peaceful while those kind of states of mind are around. And another quality that they share is that they somehow distort reality for us, that somehow they kind of misrepresent reality as we look at it in that moment. And not only that, because of our very strong habit of following along with these states of mind, we then believe these lies, right? So again, this is just to bring in again the idea that the benefit of having a good basis in the calm abiding meditation is that now we're able to listen to these lies and unpack these lies, because with a more kind of stable mind, we're not as swayed, we're not as liable to fall under the control of these minds. Because we have a little bit, to however much we're able to practice and develop this mind of calm, this quality of calm abiding, then we have much more control. And we have much more of these tools in our tool belt to use our mindfulness, our introspection, our ability to observe and not kind of get swept by what is going on, all this mental content in the mind, right? So this gives us the opportunity to really analyze what is going on with these mental states, right? And really investigate how they work and what do they do and whether in fact they're beneficial or not. Right? I mean, I'm kind of giving away the answers here, but in a sense, this is something that we shouldn't take for granted. It's something that we should investigate. And investigation begins with really looking at these states of mind and being able to kind of unpack the story in which they tell us, right? Because again, while we tend to think of especially very strong emotions like anger or desire as emotions rather than kind of thoughts, in the Buddhist kind of literature and especially the Tibetan literature, they wouldn't make such a distinction between the two things. They're just different types of mental events, but they're not completely different category. They're simply the emotions are simply more forceful and more quick, right? But it's not that they're completely different to the mental events which are like thinky type of thoughts. It's still a conceptual type of mind. It's just that it's very quick and it's very powerful. But nevertheless, when we get angry, we think it's just anger and that's it, and it's just, this raw emotion. But actually, in that moment, anger is telling us some kind of a story, right? And it's telling us some kind of a story like, oh, that guy said that to me. How dare they? I am so important, and who are they to talk to me like that? And if I just don't do anything about it, people are going to think I'm weak. So I have to respond somehow. How is the best way to respond? Well, I mean, he said something nasty to me, so I can say something nasty to them, and so on and so on and so on, right? And it's just that whole thinking process happens really, really quickly in the mind, that we don't tend to notice it, right? So again, this is where the calm abiding practice comes in, because it allows us the mental space to be able to observe this process. And the more we are able to have this kind of space in which to observe the workings of these states of mind, then the more we're able to see them for what we are, for what they are, and be able to really kind of see the way in which they work. And even just the process of seeing them is actually incredibly revealing. It's something, I mean, I saw some of you on the video kind of, smiling as I was giving this little play, right? But these are things that are going on in our mind daily, right? Maybe not daily, but very, very often, right? And so, and yet when we hear it out loud, it sounds crazy, but this is what is going on. It's just that we don't really pay attention to it, or we are not able to really see it for what it is. And because we don't see it for what it is, we kind of believe it, we follow it, we go along with it, we kind of tacitly comply with it, like that. So again, so the process here is to really be able to sit down on the cushion and use our experiences from the past and use whatever mental states are arising to really investigate these states of mind and see how they are destructive for our well-being, and really by this kind of analytical process slowly reduce them like that. So, of course, when we talk about the afflictions, there are absolutely kind of thousands of different types of mental afflictions, right? And even in the Buddhist kind of literature, the kind of classic number which they give for some reason is the 84,000 afflictions. I don't know if that is meant to be taken literally, or it's just meant to be a very, very high number to kind of give you the idea that it's a lot. But again, you don't have to kind of go one by one, because actually they have a hierarchical structure, right? Whereby there is a root. It's a kind of more like a tree, that there's a root, and from the root comes the trunks and the branches, and they kind of multiply out into various types of combinations of these more basic afflictions. So at the root, we have the mind, which is called the affliction, the base affliction, which is called ignorance, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about that tomorrow, but in very brief, this ignorance is not like the ignorance of, oh, I don't know so much about science, or I don't know I don't know what happened on the season finale of Game of Thrones, or it's not that kind of ignorance, right? But rather it is a mind that is actively engaged in superimposing a type of reality which doesn't actually exist in the way in which it appears to us, right? So we touched about it lightly before, but it's about this idea that our mind is really always kind of superimposing or exaggerating things about reality. And the very root thing that it exaggerates is the very basic kind of lie that actually that our mind has nothing to do with the way in which we perceive reality, right? This idea that reality is just as it is, and we're just kind of this passive observers, that it's there, it's already perfect, and we're just discovering it. As opposed to the way in which we perceive, the way that the mind interacts with the perceived, right? There's the perceiver and the perceived. So the way that the perceiver interacts with the perceived, the idea that this has no kind of effect on what is perceived and on the perceiver itself, that they're somehow two completely independent entities that don't affect each other whatsoever. So this is the basic ignorance that we're talking about, right? And this has many kind of ways to explain it, and we'll look a bit more about it tomorrow. But in very brief, it's this idea that there is this mind-independent, completely true and intrinsically existent reality, and we're just kind of bystanders which are kind of observing it, as opposed to the mind having any kind of participatory role in the way in which things exist. And that doesn't mean that things don't exist. Just because things depend upon how they are perceived doesn't mean that they don't exist at all. But there is an interdependence between the perceived and the perceiver, right? But we don't tend to think like that. We think, okay, there's me over here, there's reality over there, and it's kind of like the big bad world that we have to fight with, right? But it's really not like that, because actually having enemies, we have enemies outside because we have anger inside. If there was no anger, then we wouldn't really have any enemies. And likewise, we have, and so forth. Like, just to say that our mental mode of perception actually is interdependent upon how we perceive things and how we label things. So the idea that that the two are completely independent are this basic ignorance, right? Very, very briefly, again, this is a huge topic, and we will look at it in a bit more detail tomorrow. But it actually helps if we start with the bigger affliction, with the other afflictions, and work our way backwards, because then it kind of makes a bit more sense, I think. So then, but basically, from this root ignorance, we get this mind called attachment, right? And again, attachment will be defined very differently from the way we understand it to the West. But it's kind of the mind that is very grasping. It's really wanting and grasping to things and exaggerating the qualities of things. And from that, we have anger, right? So these three are usually called the three kind of root afflictions: ignorance, attachment, and anger. Right, and they're the very kind of the basis for all of the other types of mental afflictions that we have. So even though there's many different types of mental events and combinations of those that can arise, they are just that. They're kind of combinations of those original three in one way or another. Right. So if we have pride, pride is an attachment to oneself or one's qualities. Jealousy is a type of anger towards good things that happen to others, and so on and so forth, right? So all of the other different types of afflictions, while they do have their own functionality and their own antidotes that we could apply individually, the idea being that if we're able to take care of these afflictions that are there at the root, we are able to then eliminate all the other ones that are above. Just like if you cut a tree from the root, then the whole tree dies, like that. So let's dive right into it, and begin by looking first at anger. We'll go kind of backwards like that. So we'll go with anger, attachment, and tomorrow we'll look a little bit more at ignorance, because then ignorance is really this strong sense of self, and the way the self exists as this independent entity. And then it really links well with how we try to weaken this exaggerated sense of self, because when we make the self so big and so important, it's very difficult to pay attention to others, right? So then that has a very large part to play in how, if we want to develop compassion and love and the mind cherishing others, we need to work a little bit on reducing the mind that is cherishing oneself, right? So like that, but that's for tomorrow. So today, let's begin now with anger, right? So anger is defined as the mind, and it has three particular qualities, three parts to the definition, if you like. So it is a mind that exaggerates the negative qualities of something. It then, having exaggerated those negative qualities, it believes that those qualities belong to the object itself and nothing to do with us. And having exaggerated in that way, it wishes to be rid of that object by any means necessary, right? So we kind of all know this, but now thinking in terms of that definition, it's kind of already very indicative of what anger is doing, even though it's not very clear to see. Hopefully with a bit of reflection, and we can think about especially times where we've been angry in the past, right? And we can kind of try and observe what was happening in the mind right there. And so usually if we're angry with someone, the way in which we perceive that person is suddenly, I don't know about you guys, but it's kind of like an experience, like suddenly that person becomes a really bad, horrible person, right? As if they're just 100% bad. Oh, horrible. How could anyone like that person, right? So this is obviously, it's an exaggeration, right? Because no one is completely and totally terrible, right? Even if someone who's really, really, considered by a lot of people horrible, well, they must have some qualities, So, so like that, so the first, this idea that the mind actually exaggerates, it really focuses, it hones in on these negative qualities and it blows them out of proportion and it kind of outshines everything else about that person, because we just see that person in terms of, oh, it's so horrible and bad and how dare they. But then the next trick is anger then thinks, but that it's not up to, that we didn't do that. We didn't exaggerate anything. We're seeing the situation exactly the way that it is, right? Have you ever had that? You're in an argument, you're super angry, and I'm right. I'm 100% right, and they're 100% wrong, and no one can convince you otherwise, right? Because we're really sure in that moment. Anger is completely convinced us. That's kind of one of the qualities of anger, not in the good quality, but it's like a feature of anger, that anger has this great level of clarity about it, right? When we're angry, we're very clear, we're very sure that we know what's right. We're 100% sure we know what's right, and we're 100% sure the other person's to blame, right? But it's complete nonsense usually, right? And so we have this great clarity about I'm right and they're wrong and they're super bad and I'm like the victim in the situation. And so because of this great clarity, right? Again, it kind of speaks back to the faith meditation where we're so clear about that person's bad qualities, right? And we were so clear that they have absolutely no good qualities that we wish to harm them. We wish to be separated from them. We wish to get rid of what we perceive as the source of our suffering in that moment, right? Whether that means by, going away, whether it means by saying something nasty, whether it means by actually hitting the person, eliminating, get really angry with this thing and smashing it, whatever it means to be separated from it, right? It's kind of a very broad term. We then do it. Anger gives us that kind of very strong force to act upon it. But again, we're acting on a completely false information, right? So if we actually look back at previous moments of anger, times when we've got really angry and we did and said certain things. And again, I don't know about you guys, but I look back on these moments and I think, oh my God, why did I do that? Why did I say that? That was really, kind of really horrible of me, right? We usually feel regret, right? It's rare that I would say, at least in my experience, it's rare that I get angry and I do so whatever I do under the influence of anger, and later I think, oh yeah, I did really well. That I did so well in that situation. That almost never happens, right? More often it's like, oh, I didn't handle that so well. Things got out of hand. We say it like that, things got out of hand. I lost control, right? That's how we tend to describe it. So on some level, we kind of know that anger is not good, right? On some level, we kind of know that anger is not a beneficial thing, that it's not a good thing that we aspire to, right? No one likes angry people. And likewise, no one wakes up in the morning thinking, oh, you know what? Today I'm going to get really good and angry, right? That's my number one plan. I'm just going to get really, really good and angry. No one wakes up saying that, right? So on some level, we know that anger is negative. We know that anger is bad. So then why do we do it, right? Why do we do it? So again, it's going back towards this, the faith meditation, right? As I'm going to continue calling it, because although intellectually we might kind of understand, yeah, anger is not nice and we don't like it in people, but at the same time, we carry around this idea that actually anger is very useful, right? We tend to think of anger as our protector, right? If I don't get angry, who's going to protect me? If I don't get angry, people are going to walk all over me, right? And so we kind of tend to see the advantages of anger, right? And we see and then on the flip side, we see the disadvantages of not getting angry, because we think of patience as passivity, right? We mistake patience for passivity. We think that, oh, okay, so I'm supposed to be a good Buddhist and I'm supposed to not get angry. So I'm just going to be like, oh, yeah, everything's good, everything's okay. You can keep hitting me, but it's okay. So not like that. That's not what patience means, right? That's kind of a little bit, not so nice either. But so the point being that we see this in a very polarized way. We see it in terms of these two extremes, that either we have to, repress the anger. Okay, anger's no good, so I have to repress it. Or we think, well, but it's got to go somewhere, so I have to express it. And then the fits go flying. And we think those are the only two options that we have. So, and then as a result, you get this kind of philosophy of, oh, if I'm angry and I'm going to do what I'm going to do. Or you say, well, it's not good to get angry, so I'm just going to bottle it up inside and, cause all sorts of health problems for myself, right? But no, so the first point to understand here is that those are not the only two options, but rather that the absence of anger doesn't mean that we become this really passive, inactive type of a person, but rather that the mind of patience, right? The mind of patience is more, which is the antidote to anger, the opposite of anger, right? So this mind of patience is really about developing a mind which doesn't get disturbed, doesn't get kind of thrown off the horse whenever we encounter with suffering, right? So whenever we have all these different types of difficult situations, difficult people, whatever it might be, the quality of patience is really a quality of being calm and peaceful and level-headed in the face of that situation or person, and so on and so forth. Because actually, if you really think about it, then having a much more calm, level-headed mind is much more likely to help us solve the situation, and not make it worse, right? Anger is really, if we really analyze, anger is only going to make things worse, because the one person's angry, we respond with anger. They have to think, their anger is now telling them, okay, I have to get even more angry. And then our anger is telling them we have to get even more angry. And that's why countries go to war in the end, right? So, the point being that having instead being able to develop this calm, peaceful mind, which is able to reflect upon this, look at the situation more calmly and peacefully, then we're much more likely to be able to solve the problem, get out of the uncomfortable, problematic situation in a way that benefits everyone, or at least benefits as many people as we possibly can and harms as few people as we possibly can. So often the question comes up here about, and it's especially kind of valid these days as it always is, what about like social justice, and things of that kind, where we seem like we want to get angry because we want to affect social change and we want to fight the system and so on and so forth. But actually, it is in a way, it is kind of utilizing anger's power. When I said that anger, because of its clarity, it gives us a lot of power. It makes us act, right? So it is thinking that it is good to utilize that quality of anger without thinking about the other consequences of anger, which is, like we said before, that anger actually distorts the situation and it exaggerates the negative qualities of the other person or the other side, such that it actually becomes very difficult to get to any kind of an agreement or any kind of a solution to the problem. So far from making the situation easier to solve, it makes it more difficult to solve. But with this kind of a gridlock, we still act. And so the action that are derived from that are much more likely to be violent in nature, right? And I'm using violent in a very broad sense of the word, right? As in non-peaceful in nature. Whereas rather than get angry, one can be just as activist, just as much of an activist and just as much of a warrior for social change with a mind of compassion, right? Because again, these minds of patience and compassion, in no way, nowhere is it written or nowhere is it said that these are very passive kinds of mind, right? We kind of have this idea that if you're compassionate, if you're patient, you're kind of this very bowing and very kind of sweet and calm and quiet type of a person. But this is really not the case. The best example is if we think about, the mother's compassion for the child, right? If the mother sees the child running off into the street and there's a car coming about to, run it over, the mom's not going to be like, "Hey, Timmy, no, don't do that, Timmy. It's not good." Right? She's not going to be timid. No, she's going to yank the child out of the road and get him out the way and be very forceful, because it's for the child's good. If she doesn't act now and immediately in a very decisive manner, then she's not going to be able to protect the child. But that doesn't come out of anger, right? It comes out of compassion, because what is driving her in that moment is this thought that I must save the child, right? And what is that thought? It is the wish for someone to be free from suffering, right? And that is the very definition of compassion. So again, in terms of a motivation, in terms of what is driving our actions, if we wish to solve problems, if we wish to deal with all these difficult situations, then a mind which says, may everyone be free from suffering and focuses on that as its goal is much more beneficial and can be just as forceful as the mind thinking, well, they're wrong and I'm right, and therefore we have to, get rid of them somehow, right? So again, it's this idea. So to kind of change the way that we perceive this, and this everything I've been talking about now is the first way that we should meditate upon anger, because this is in itself a faith meditation, as I keep calling it. We're looking at the way in which the advantages, or let's say the disadvantages of getting angry and the advantages of not getting angry. Right? And the advantages of instead relying upon patience and compassion, and the disadvantages of not relying on patience and compassion, by all these various ways of thinking about it and analyzing it, right? And by doing that repeatedly, then we are slowly, reducing our mind's dependence upon anger, right? Very, very slowly, we're changing by that process of, faith, aspiration, effort, and so forth. We're very slowly reducing the mind's dependence upon, taking actions with anger. And we're very slowly increasing the mind's dependence upon utilizing compassion and patience instead. I like that. So that is kind of the first method of looking at anger and what we should do as a kind of a basis. And then on top of that, then we start kind of actually using the analytical meditation to also analyze past instances of anger, right? Past experiences where we got angry and behaved in certain ways, and then using logic, right, to try and transform the way that we would see the situation and handle the situation, right? So for this, the most kind of famous text that was written is the 6th chapter of Shantideva's The Bodhisattva's Way of Life. Right? It's a very, very famous text. It was originally written in Sanskrit. It was translated in Tibetan. It's kind of one of these texts that everyone sees as the main kind of practice text, because it's very beautifully written. It's all in verses, and especially the 6th chapter is all about dealing with anger, right? And it's all, and Shantideva, the author, he is incredibly sharp with his logic, so much so that it's sometimes incredibly infuriating, right? Because he gives you these very, very precise and very kind of super logical arguments about why anger is really silly and useless. And you just kind of want to go, but, right? So I'm going to give you some examples now and watch your reactions, because I guarantee it's going to be but, right? So Shantideva tells us, for example, that we can think about a situation in our past, right? A situation where something went wrong, or we were in some kind of a difficulty. I don't know, we were waiting for the bus, and then we didn't know the bus is going to show up, or some kind of a situation. Don't start too big. Start small, and then we think of the situation, and we kind of, at that time we got angry, and then we did certain things, and maybe it wasn't so nice and useful. And so now try to imagine that situation again, and without getting angry about it again. We're not trying to get angry about it again, but just remembering it. And then kind of ask yourself, of this situation, one of two things is true, right? Either we could do something to change it, or we couldn't do anything to change the situation, right? It's just, there's no third possibility, right? We either could do something to solve the problem, or we couldn't do anything to solve the problem, right? Good so far? Now, if there was something we could do to solve the problem in that situation, what is the point of getting angry about it, right? Anger is not going to help us solve the problem. We just need to go ahead and solve the problem, right? We just need to do whatever action was required to solve the problem, and then it's done, and then we don't have to get angry about it. So we don't have to get angry before, afterwards, and we don't have to get angry before, because anger is not going to help us solve it, right? So what's the point of getting angry? And then if there's nothing we can do about the situation, there's no way to solve the problem, then again, what's the point of getting angry, right? Anger is not going to add anything to that situation, is it? In fact, it's going to make things worse, because now not only do we have the problem that we're facing, but we're also really angry as well, right? And no one likes to be angry. It's not a pleasant kind of feeling. So it's like having a wound and then throwing salt on it. We're just adding insult to injury, right? So either way, there's really no point. There's no usefulness to anger there, right? So then if that kind of somehow makes sense, then you kind of analyze it in that way. And a good exercise to do is to try to rewind the situation and play through it again, but this time still keeping that kind of insight fresh in one's mind, trying to replay the situation again, but trying to do it without anger, and trying to replace the mind with patience and compassion, right? And at first it's difficult. It's not easy, because our habit of anger is so strong, and we're using this logic, and the logic is so simple and obvious that we're like, but I want to get angry. But slowly, as we kind of try to work with it, and we are able to make that transformation. First by the faith meditation, which again weakens this idea of, oh, I want to get angry. But then through slowly understanding that actually anger never has a purpose. Anger never helps anything. It only makes things worse, right? And so you play through the situation again, and you see actually, this second time round, was it better or worse, right? And usually the answer is better, right? Like that. Another example that Shantideva gives us. Oh my God, yes. So this time he asked us to imagine a time when we were, someone else was insulting us or criticizing us, right? And we got angry about it, right? So again, kind of picture the situation. Don't get angry, but just remember it. And now again, sort of, of the situation, we can analyze it. And we say, again, of the situation, one of two things is true, right? Either what the person is saying is true, or it's false, right? There's no third answer there. Either what the person is saying is true, or it's false. Now, if what the person is saying is false, then what's the point of getting upset, right? What's the point of getting angry about it? It's kind of like someone coming along and saying, you have a horn on your head. And you'd be like, what? I mean, no, that's completely stupid, right? So in the same way, no matter what kind of a falsity it is, it's just empty words. And whatever reason they have for doing it, I mean, let them keep that. That's kind of their business, right? If we get angry about it, the only person that loses out is us. So, I mean, what's the point of getting upset about it, right? If what they're saying is true, then again, what's the point of getting upset, right? That's someone saying, you have a nose on your face, right? Well, yes, okay, thank you. And especially here, and there's an extra trick here if we like, but this one is especially difficult, that especially if it's something that they're pointing out which is true and that you weren't aware of, then you can actually think, oh my God, actually, far from being unkind and a horrible person, which is what anger is wanting to tell you, actually this person is being really kind to me right now, because they're giving me an opportunity to recognize one of my faults, which I haven't seen up till now. So actually, that's really, really kind of them. Thank you, right? As I'm saying, this is not an easy one, right? It takes a lot of time to be able to see the enemy as being actually one of the kindest people one of the kindest types of people that we have. But again, even if you don't want to go that far, simply thinking that, okay, but what they're saying is true, so thank you very much. I'll take it into consideration. And, if it's something that I, have the mental space to work on, I'll work on it. And there you go. What's the point of getting upset? What's the point of getting angry? Right? So again, you can rewind and you can try the situation again without anger, but with patience and compassion instead, right? And see whether it's better or worse. Yeah? And again, usually better. So like that, there's a kind of a variety of ways, and you're going to do a meditation with Felipe about this later. So I'm not going to continue on like this. I still have to get through to attachment. But you kind of get the idea that that there's kind of two main approaches here. One being this faith meditation, which is again about our habit of anger. And then there's also undermining the story that anger is telling us by seeing how it's actually not useful in any kind of a way. And actually it's more harmful than it is useful, because it is telling us, oh, this person is completely horrible. There's nothing good about them, right? Like that. And we'll see more ways when we look at attachment, because this is going to be the opposite side of the coin. And you'll see in dealing with that, how it also applies to anger. So let's quickly move on, because we don't have a lot of time again. So then the next mind that we're going to look at is this mind of attachment. And attachment also has a very particular definition in this case, which is that attachment, and it's the exact opposite of anger, right? So attachment is the mind that exaggerates positive qualities onto the object, whether it's a person or a situation or an actual object. It exaggerates these positive qualities. It believes those qualities to be part of the object and nothing to do with our perception of it, right? And then having imputed those qualities, having superimposed those qualities, wants to possess it, right? So whereas anger was imposing negative qualities and wants to be separated from it, attachment superimposes positive qualities and then it wants to possess it, right? Like that. So again, here, this mind of attachment is actually slightly trickier to work with, because while anger is very loud and it's very explosive and it's very kind of easy to recognize, the mind of attachment, it acts more slowly, it acts more subtly, right? And it can sometimes be very difficult to actually recognize, right? Because it can happen very, very progressively. It seeps in step by step. But actually, still the very point being is that, again, like with the anger, we only see the negative qualities about that thing, and it completely eclipses the positive qualities. Here, the mind can get to such a state where it pays so much attention to the positive qualities that it completely eclipses any of the negative qualities, right? And then we get obsessed with things, right? So in one kind of easy example, and it's kind of a funny example, so, I mean, nowadays we can't do this, but imagine you're walking into a bar and it's a crowded bar and, it's nice with the music and all this and that. And then you from across the room, you spot that perfect someone, and it's, just, oh, they're so wonderful. And it's almost like there's an aura around them. And, and you go up and you see them and they seem so nice. And, oh, if only I could talk to that person, I would be so happy. And then you start imagining things like, oh, we could be together. you know, and we can imagine the house and the kids and all this thing. You haven't even spoken to this person yet, right? But the mind gets carried away with all this superimposition, all this kind of exaggeration of how wonderful and magical and all these things, which are not actually there on the person. It's not to say that the person might not be perfectly nice and well, but you know, you haven't even spoken to them yet. You may go up to them and actually say hello, and then in 5 minutes you realize you have nothing in common. Thank you very much, bye-bye, right? But so the mind, this mind of attachment is really, really good at convincing us, telling us this amazing fantasy, this amazing, you know, fairy tale about people, about situations, about objects, right? Such that we get really, really attached to them. We must possess them. And it really seems as if these objects become the very cause of our happiness, right? The main and singularly only cause of our happiness. And then we must have it. And if we don't have it, we get angry or we get depressed because, oh, if I don't have that person, how will I ever be happy? And so on and so forth, right? I know, again, it's crazy when we hear it spoken out loud, but this is the thought process that is going on kind of very subtly in the mind. And this is the thought process that we call attachment, right? Now, the problem is that, again, the mind, you know, some people, well, what's the problem? But the problem is that that mind completely loses touch with reality, right? And so you're no longer really interacting with the person or the object that you actually have in front of you, but instead you're really interacting with your mental conception of that, your exaggerations and your projections about that person or that thing. And so your expectations that go through the roof. And then poor so-and-so, who's going to be able to live up to those expectations, right? So like that. So it really creates this impossible picture of reality where we really think like like this fairy tale, basically, this fantasy world, which we then, you know, we're setting ourselves up for disappointment, right? Like that. And not only that, but actually, if we think about the different thought processes that are involved around this kind of mind of attachment, then we see that most of the time, it doesn't actually lead us to any kind of mental happiness at all, right? We kind of, again, if we go back to thinking, well, why do we use attachment? Why, like with anger, we ask, well, why do we use anger as a tool? Well, here, if we ask, why do we use attachment as a tool? Well, because we think attachment is the bringer of happiness, right? If I'm not going to chase after all these beautiful, wonderful, amazing things, then how am I ever going to be happy? So again, the problem is not with the things, right? It's not with the people, and it's not with the things, and it's not with any of that, but it's our projections, and it's our losing touch with reality and building up all these expectations, which are completely out of touch with what's actually going on in front of us, right? So then, because when we build up this kind of a picture, the mind is never really at ease. The mind is never really at rest, right? If we think about, I mean, it's easiest, I'm using this example again and again because it's very poignant about the so-called partner, this other person that you fancy so much. So then, before you kind of get to be with that person, then actually there's so much anxiety in the mind about, oh, will I get them? Won't I get them? How will it be? Oh, I'm kind of anxious. I'm scared. I'm like this. And so there's so much work so much mental acrobatics that the mind has to do, right? And it's never really at ease. And then we finally, you know, get to be with that person, and we find out actually it's so much work to maintain. Because again, we're not dealing with the person, we're dealing with our projections of that person, and most likely they're dealing with their projections of us. And both of us think we have to, you know, maintain that superficial or that like super duper versions of ourselves, which is kind of impossible over the long term. And so we have to work really super hard to maintain that veneer of this superficial reality. So that's so much work. I mean, it's exhausting just thinking about it, right? And then at the end, when things eventually, you know, move along and we separate from that person for whatever reason, you know, the ultimate reason being death, right? We will have to leave this person eventually because of death, if not before that through breaking up or whatever. But eventually when we separate from that person, then again the mind is incredibly sad, the mind is incredibly unhappy. And far more than, like, I'm not talking about, okay, we shouldn't grieve at any point, or we should, grieve is not a good thing, but rather that, again, we build up this thing as the only thing that will ever make us happy. And so the type of disappointment, the type of sadness that comes along with it is kind of very debilitating. It's as if now everything, what have I got left to live for? If I don't have that person, the world is empty. And people talk like that, right? When just after a breakup and they're going through that phase, and it seems like the world is over and everything's crap, and there's nothing worth living for. And it's really just because of this exaggeration that it's as if you've lost the only possible reason you might have for existing. But obviously, like that, that's an exaggeration. So in this way, again, thinking in these different ways about how actually the mind of attachment, far from being the provider of happiness, it's actually keeping us away from whatever it is in front of us. And it's keeping us from being able to enjoy anything, really, right? Because the opposite of attachment is not kind of detachment, right? It's not this passivity of like, oh, I don't care about anything, nothing's good, so may as well do nothing, and right? It's not that at all, right? But rather, it is simply the mind that is able to be with the object, whatever it is, whether you're eating the chocolate cake. Also with the chocolate cake, we think, oh, it's the best thing in the world, and and then we're so sad when it's finished. Oh, well, should I get another one? And but again, whatever it is, we're spending attachment spends so much time on these conceptual constructs and thinking about it, and this, and planning, and doing, and maintaining, and all this kind of stuff, that we're actually never really paying attention to the actual thing or person that is actually in front of us and interacting with that, right? So, because if we were able to do that, then we would be able to see that, whatever experience that is happening to us, then it is in the nature of impermanence, right? And you did a little meditation on this yesterday with Felipe, so you did it kind of before, so it kind of applies now, that, we will be able to see that whatever experience that we have, it is going to arise at some point, it's going to stay for a while, and it's going to finish, right? And if we spend most of our time, which is what attachment wants to do, in fighting that fact that it's eventually going to finish and we have to make it better, and we want more and better and bigger, and not being satisfied or unhappy with what we have, then actually we're destroying our happiness rather than being able to just enjoy what is in front of us. And so if we get that wonderful thing, we're really happy and we enjoy it. And when it finishes, it finishes. That's the nature of it. And if we don't get the wonderful thing, well, that's okay too, because there will be other things, right? And it's just a mind that is very calm and clear and very happy to remain with reality. And you work for things. It doesn't mean you can't have things that you like and you dislike. It's not about, again, it's not about becoming passive or this kind of stone of detachment, but understanding that, since things are all impermanent and they're changing moment by moment, things are going to start, stay for a while and finish. Likewise, because attaining anything takes all these different causes and conditions, the majority of which are out of our control, we're not always going to get what we want. And if we do get it, it might not be exactly what we wanted. And so just being able to take things as they come with a very level-headed kind of attitude, which is then much more able to enjoy and really take advantage of whatever it is that we're experiencing in the present moment, instead of getting caught up of worrying about the future or worrying about other things, such that we're never really able to really stay with that present moment, really stay with what is happening, or stay with the actual person as they are, right? And I don't know about you guys, but most of the time my experience is, getting to find out the nature of that person as they are, as opposed to who I thought they were. It's actually a very nice experience. It's far from being scary or like, oh, it's going to ruin my illusion of them, as because we think of, especially with partners, in the beginning you go through this honeymoon phase and you think they're perfect, They don't fart and they don't stink and they don't do any of that stuff, right? They're perfect. But actually, that's kind of a very kind of just a projection of our mind, of attachment that thinks in this very perfectionist type of way. But it's actually when that breaks apart that you actually get to know the person. And this gives you the opportunity to really connect with them on a much more human level. And so being able to see attachment in this way, being able to see attachment as really something that gets in the way, we're able to have the mind remain a lot more realistic about whatever it is that we are experiencing. So again, the way to meditate on this is, first of all, as before, doing this faith meditation in the way that kind of we've been talking about it. Really, it kind of comes down to that, about thinking the advantages and disadvantages and so forth. Then also, it is really the impermanence meditation that you did with Felipe. This kind of thinking about the way things are changing moment by moment is a really powerful antidote to attachment. Because attachment, one of the main ways that attachment fools us is that attachment has a very strong way of solidifying things and making things very permanent, right? We think about, we think about the I don't know, the gadget, the phone, as something like, oh, I bought it and I spent a lot of money on it and it's mine and it's the best one, and we really, we kind of get really attached to it. And we kind of think it's kind of somehow permanent, as if it's not going to break one day and disappoint us and crash and do all these different things. Because why do we think that? Because, it drops and it breaks, and I'm like, oh, we're surprised. Like, how could that happen? But why is that surprising, really? It shouldn't really be surprising, because that's just the nature of things, that things will eventually break. It's just a matter of sooner or later. And it then applies also to thinking about ourselves, right? And actually, we too are impermanent. Our body is aging and our mind is changing moment by moment. And so not to see things in too much of a static way, right? And being in this way, allowing ourselves to grow and just be who we are, knowing that we can change it. Right? And likewise, looking at other people with this kind of a mind that doesn't exaggerate and build up this kind of, fantasy persona for them, but understand that just like ourselves, they have a mind, and the mind is changing moment by moment. So they're going to have good days and they're going to have bad days, and right, because a person suddenly having a bad day and is like, why are they like this? As if they're not allowed to change, on a daily basis, right? And again, this kind of comes from this idea of grasping onto permanence. So this meditation on impermanence and trying to become more aware of how things are changing moment by moment, then it has a great effect as an antidote to attachment. Another, just very, very quickly, sorry, another kind of way to, another antidote, another way to meditate on attachment is what's called, very kind of non-PC, called the ugliness meditation. Right? But what it actually means is that, as we said before, attachment focuses exclusively on the positive qualities, and it completely eclipses all the negative qualities, right? So if you can try and think of even just one negative quality about that thing or that person, it has a great effect to kind of shatter that illusion, right? So you don't want to take it too far. You don't want to go overboard and start like, oh yeah, they're horrible and they're like this, and you don't want to start hating that person. But you're just trying to think of kind of just one example even of, if it's the person and you're in that honeymoon phase or whatever, but you can think about, or if it's your family or something, you just think of one occasion when that person wasn't making you happy, you were having an argument or something like that, and it just works well to shatter that illusion, which again is linked with this idea of permanence and that they're 100% good and perfect, just to shatter that illusion and have a kind of more down-to-earth way of looking at them and perceiving them, So it's not trying to be mean, but it's just kind of trying to, it's actually kind in a way, because you're no longer treating them in terms of this fantasy that you have of them, but you're trying to really see who they are, faults and all, right? And respect and love them for it. Likewise, you can, just the final one, you can also think about the nature of these qualities that you perceive in that person and trying to analyze, where are these qualities? Or rather, are these qualities really, really there, right? Because when we perceive that super duper beautiful person, or that chocolate cake, which was like the most amazing thing in the world, you know, and we treat those qualities as if they're part of the object, right? We even sometimes speak like that. We say that cake is really tasty. We don't say, I find that cake really tasty. To my taste buds, that cake is really tasty. We don't usually speak like that. We say it as if it's a fact, as if it's a quality of the object. That cake is really tasty. But if that were really the case, if that was truth, then everyone should find it tasty, right? Because if that was just a part of what it means to be the cake, or if that person, if what it means to be that person, one of their intrinsic qualities was to be beautiful, then everyone should think that they're beautiful, right? But people will disagree, right? So again, you can kind of see that actually while attachment is making you think that those qualities that you perceive are part of the object and they're somehow really there, so that once they're there, obviously you want to get it. Then you try to see, well, is that really the case? And you kind of see, well, no, actually, it's much more to do with my perception of that object, right? And so, again, it helps to kind of temper that kind of attitude of attachment, which kind of runs out to kind of after the fantasy version of whatever it is, right? Okay, so that's kind of a very, in a nutshell, kind of, again, just dealing with anger and dealing with attachment as a way to kind of, again, analyze these states of mind and try to reduce their power in the mind, reduce the amount in which we depend on them as useful tools, and seeing how they're actually completely misrepresenting reality to us in one way or another, such that, you know, it leads us into all sorts of trouble, right? Because again, if our mind is really out of touch with reality, then whatever actions we take on the basis of that is also going to be out of touch with reality. And it's much more likely to go wrong and lead us into all sorts of trouble, right? So seeing all these disadvantages and advantages, and then seeing the faults, seeing the lies that these minds are telling us, then we just do this repeatedly in terms of, you know, training the mind in, you know, and familiarizing the mind with these kind of opposite thought processes, seeing that, no, anger is not the way. Rather, if I use patience and compassion, that's going to be much more useful from now on, and slowly kind of shifting the scale. And likewise with attachment, you know, instead of relying on attachment, saying, no, attachment is never, you know, a good mind to let myself drift down, but rather trying to have this more realistic perception of things and in the way that they really are. And trying to shift the mind towards that through a continued practice, right? Like that. So we're going to leave it here for today. And I believe that Tishita's director wants to have a quick word before we move on to the questions and answers. So Felipe or Pema, are you there?
Yeah, yes. 1 second.
Hello, everyone. So thank you all for your presence here. So I just want to quickly remind or request or encourage you all to support us by making donations. And also offerings are most welcome for Shahar and Felipe. And the links to make the donations are given there on the email when you register for the course. So you can refer back to that email, or you can write to us at register@tushita.info. And then another one, we just launched 2 new courses just yesterday. Many of you might have seen already, but just to give you the dates again. So we have next Calm and Focus course coming up with Venerable Dharma on July 6th to 16th. So it starts on Monday, coming Monday. So details are there on our website, so you can register. And after that, we have the Path of Joy or start on July 20 to 24th with one of our visiting teachers. She leads the course from US Philadelphia, so registrations are open for that as well. And then we have in the email also we have given our Amazon wish list, so you can also support us by purchasing any of the items from Amazon wish list. Yeah, thank you so much. Enjoy your course.
All right. Okay, let me see questions. All right, I'll just read this one. I was trying to summarize it, but prefer to say. You say that the basic afflictive emotion is based on ignorance of real perception of reality, of the perception of reality. It would be fair to say, would it be fair to say that the perception of separation between the individual self and the universe or reality out there is the root cause of that ignorance? If so, would the real knowledge of one's own reality be the remedy for that root ignorance? Kind of how ignorance is defined and how to counter.
So I wouldn't go so far as to say that it is correct to say that you know, it is about the way in which the perceiver and the perceived are interdependent on one another. And so when you say kind of the self and the universe, you know, being kind of, how did you say, kind of there's no separation. So when you say no separation, it kind of makes it sound as if they become one, or if they become kind of indivisible. Whereas actually from the Buddhist point of view, it's not quite like that, because can I get the video back, Felipe? So
the video of
myself.
Yeah, we're seeing you. We can see you.
Okay, there you go. So, oh, there we go. So, so whereas from the Buddhist point of view, it's not that, that there's no division whatsoever. It's not that everything becomes one and that one in the universe becomes one and so on and so forth. Because the self and, you know, the self and other, which I'm using as a word for everything which isn't the self, right, due to being interdependent, right? For things to be interdependent, you still need two things, right? Something can't be in a relation with itself, right? So you still require two things, which are self and other. But the ignorance, what the ignorance gets wrong in this case, is the idea that actually these two things are not interdependent. They're actually two separate entities which exist independently of each other, right? Again, and this is kind of very, I mean, this is a huge topic, right? So it's not so much that everything kind of dissolves into this oneness, but rather that in the multiplicity of all the, you know, countless phenomena that exist, there isn't this separation of things being completely independent of one another. Whereas rather everything exists in dependence upon other things, right? And we'll look at this a lot more tomorrow, and also how it then affects the meditation and the thinking around compassion. But just to give you a quick kind of teaser, then today we looked at first at anger and then at attachment, and now tomorrow we're going to start a little bit with this ignorance. So now, if anger was exaggerating negative qualities that don't actually exist out there, independent of us, right? And attachment was exaggerating positive qualities that don't really exist out there, independent of us, right? If you take away all those negative qualities and the positive qualities which were being exaggerated by attachment and anger, what's left? Right? So the short answer is that ignorance thinks that there has to be something left, right? Ignorance is the insistence that there must be something there that exists completely independently and self-sufficiently, you know, that completely does not depend in any way upon the mind or the perception of it. Whereas from the point of view, from the Buddhist point of view, that is exactly what it gets wrong. It gets wrong, this idea that there can be anything. Once you remove all these different wrong exaggerations about reality, there's actually nothing left that exists completely independently from the mind. It doesn't mean it is the mind, it doesn't mean it is a part of the mind, but it exists interdependently on the mind, right? And that's just the way that things exist, right? I say obviously, but this is a huge topic, right? In the Gompas, in the monasteries, they spend like 20 years studying this. But just to kind of get that idea that not quite the opposite of being independent is being dependent, right? So they exist in dependence upon one another, and that's why we each kind of perceive our own reality in a way. But there's not that there's many realities and we're all living in our own solipsistic bubble, right? But rather, we all perceive things in dependence upon our mind, which is kind of different, in dependence upon our, as I said, upon our sensory apparatus, in dependence upon how much anger we've developed, how much love we've developed, because again, we discussed how these different mental states affect the way that we perceive reality, right? But actually there's still agreement, things that we can agree upon, right? And that agreement is enough, it's sufficient to be able to, for us to be able to communicate and talk and share our experiences because it works, right? But it's not the case that we're talking about some kind of perfectly independent reality, right? We look at, what's good? We have this kind of a cup, right? And we kind of think that the cup is a completely separate entity from me. And it's just there and it exists and it has all these, whatever qualities it has and it doesn't have, it just has without dependence upon any kind of a mind. But then all of us are kind of seeing a very different cup, right? Some of you like the cup, some of you hate the cup, some of you think nothing whatsoever about the girl, it's whatever, it's all right, none of you sees the cup in the same way because actually with a camera it doesn't quite work because you're looking through the same camera, right? But I see a very different angle of the cup and you see a very different angle of the cup. None of us, if there's 10 people in a room, no one can see the cup in exactly the same way. So we all see a different version of the cup and so on and so forth, right? I mean, again, you can then apply this to the chocolate cake, you can apply it to the person, all these variety of qualities that we somehow think exist as part of the object and nothing to do with us. If we do a little bit of investigating, and we'll talk about this, how to do this investigation a little bit tomorrow. If we do a little bit of investigating, if we prod it, then we're actually not able to find that quality without resorting to the explanation of the mind, of involving the mind somehow and the perception of that quality, right? So that is what is being talked about with ignorance, that ignorance think that they have nothing to do with one another. Whereas the nature of reality, according to the Buddhist point of view, is that all these things arise interdependently, like that. So I went a bit overboard there, but yeah.
All right, there's two similar questions. Let me see if I can summarize them. It's basically relating to not reacting with anger to situations where there's a bunch of people that don't behave, appropriately from a social point of view. Like, for example, how do you maintain equanimity when people are actively endangering lives and won't deal with the reality that they are wrong, or when there's people who are deceptive, act to be one way, but then they actually attack you or hurt you, harm you from behind. How not to get angry with that?
Yeah. So again, it's really, so of course, how not to get angry. I mean, again, it's through the practice. You just do your best in the situation, and then the practice is something that is a long-term project to help change the mind. But the way in which to think about it, and the way in which to try and think about it, is that actually, another thing that anger does is that it mixes up the person with the person's behavior, right? We have this anger makes us think, okay, this person did a negative thing, did a harmful thing, and therefore they are a bad person, right? But that's not logical at all, right? Just because they do something negative doesn't define them as a negative person, right? Because if they are just a horrible negative person in that way, then there's nothing to do about it, right? You have to just get rid of that person. But no one engages in purely, and if they're a negative person, it would mean that they would have to be 100% engaging in negative actions and harmful actions all the time. But no one is able to do that, In the very minimum, you have to brush your teeth at some point, right? So again, if we're able to keep these two things separate in the mind, then it gives us a lot more space to be able to handle these kind of situations with a lot more wisdom, right? Because if we just think, oh, it's a horrible person and they're engaging in this negative activity, then it just kind of leaves us with only one option, which is to kind of, get rid of the person, or kind of, kind of get rid of the person, right? Whereas if we are, sorry, one second. So moreover, if we just see that person, okay, they're a negative person, then we are only left with this idea of, okay, so we have to reject the person because they're negative, so they're bad, they're awful. But on the other hand, it kind of excuses their behavior, right? Because, well, I mean, they're a horrible person, so what did you expect them to do, right? And then people get away with all sorts of awful things because, people think, well, they're just a bad person. What are we going to do about it? There's nothing to do. That's just their nature, right? But so this is kind of the way anger thinks, and it kind of fuses those two together, the person with their behavior. Whereas if we're able to be a bit more patient and compassionate, right, having our head screwed on properly, and we try to keep these two things apart, right, and we see that actually, while the behavior is negative, it doesn't define the person. That person is still a living being who wishes to be happy and doesn't want to suffer, just like us. They have all these mental afflictions which are tormenting them and causing them a great deal of suffering, right? And it's because of that suffering that they're inflicting this harm on another person, right? So we can develop some level of understanding and compassion towards the person. But that doesn't mean that we accept their behavior, right? Because as I said before, this mind of compassion, this mind of patience is not a passive mind, right? But now we have this space, we can see, okay, there's love and compassion and patience with the person. And so we want to help that person because obviously they're going through it. If they're harming people, they're suffering a lot, right? That's just the way it works. But we don't have to excuse the behavior. We have to deal with the behavior. But then actually, if we think, well, how do we deal with that person's negative behavior? Then actually, having this clear mind about oneself, which is able to take into account not only the recipients of the harm, but also the inflictor of the harm, right? Then we're much more likely to solve the situation in a much more effective manner, right? Because again, if we respond with violence, it's much more likely to create more violence, right? We often think, one Tibetan geshe said this once, if you have an enemy, right? And you think, okay, he's my main problem. He's the main problem in my life. If I'm just able to kill that enemy, all my problems will be solved for the moment, right? So you kill that enemy. But that enemy had lots of friends. And because you killed their friend, now all of those are your enemies. So you had one enemy, now you have 10. So you're going to have to kill 10 enemies. Each one of those 10 has 10, right? So actually it's making things worse and worse and worse because anger gets you to deal with the, even though what they were doing in the beginning might have been harmful, anger gets you to deal with what they're doing in a very unconstructive manner. So when we say, okay, instead react with patience and react with compassion, it doesn't mean you just let the person continue doing what they're doing. You take action to prevent further, suffering, but your perspective is a little bit wider, because not only are you trying to prevent further suffering for the victim, you're also trying to prevent further suffering for the perpetrator, right? And with a calm, level mind, it is most usually possible, right? And again, this goes into a lot of things about, talking about punishment versus rehabilitation, and all sorts of debates around that. But in short, it's just to understand that these minds are not passive, that these minds are not just thinking, oh, it's okay, whatever. But actually, no, if someone's about to punch you, you get out of the way. Or, if you see someone hurting someone else, you try to prevent that from happening. But you do it in a way that, if you do it with anger, you're much more likely to make the situation worse. Whereas if you do it with compassion, if you do it with patience, right? Patience doesn't mean waiting around, right? It just means that you're dealing with the situation with a calm and clear mind. Then you're much more likely to solve the problem to everyone's benefit, like that.
All right. Shall
Okay.
we go ahead to meditation?
Yes. So thank you very much, everyone, and please join again tomorrow at the same time. We will continue the final day. So thank you very much. See you tomorrow.
All right, so everyone please set up your posture. We're going to do meditation on different aspects of the disadvantages of anger and some antidotes for that as well. So allow your body to be stable and grounded. Taking the invitation of the bell to come back to the space of the body. Preparing the body by letting go of all tension and tightness. Settling down, allowing all the tension to dissolve, allowing the body to relax. Cultivating stillness, relaxation, and vigilance. Simply let the body rest. So briefly recollecting the definition of anger, which can arise toward people, objects, or our own suffering. For example, when we're sick or mentally unhappy. Anger arises due to exaggerating the negative qualities of a person, object, or situation, or by superimposing negative qualities that aren't there. Anger then wants to harm the source of unhappiness. And this term is a generic term, which includes being irritated, annoyed, critical, judgmental, self-righteous, belligerent, and hostile. So we can think of the disadvantages of anger. And for this, I'll read from a quote from Shantideva, which says, "The mind does not find peace, nor does it enjoy pleasure and joy, nor does it find sleep or fortitude when the thorn of hatred and anger dwells in the heart." So in order to reflect on the disadvantages of anger, bring up some instances from your own experience where you've become angry. The point of this is not to give rise to anger again, but rather to simply analyze and observe the situation and how you reacted. Almost as if you're observing the whole thing from a third person perspective. But being aware of what you were feeling, what you were experiencing at that moment. And the first thing to think about is, are you happy when you're angry? Is it possible to feel joy and a calm mind while you have a full-blown anger? Perhaps bring into mind different situations where anger arose in your mind stream. You can see and analyze if there's a pattern in the type of situations in which you become angry, or the people with whom you get angry. Check what effect this pattern has on your own life, how it affects you. Do you think that you communicate with others effectively when you're angry? Or perhaps you aggressively lash out at them? Or maybe you're the kind of person that withdraws and doesn't speak? Do you find this to be beneficial? And if you happen to let your anger loose and take control of your speech, later when you're calm and the anger has subsided, how do you feel about what you said and did when you were angry? Is there a sense of shame, guilt, or loss of self-esteem? And then think about how you appear in others' eyes when you're angry, how you look like when you're angry. Do you think that aspect promotes mutual respect, harmony, and friendship? So seeing how anger is detrimental for your own well-being and peace of mind, you can think about some antidotes that you can apply when anger arises. Again, bringing up examples from your own experience, from your own life, making it personal. You can start by thinking of a point when somebody insulted you or told you something which was hurtful. And in a situation like that, you can analyze whether or not what the other person says is true. But then in either case, there's no reason to get angry when you're criticized. If what they say is true, then both the other person and you know that that's the case. So there's no reason to get angry about it. You can simply acknowledge it. On the other hand, if someone blames you for something you didn't do, you know perfectly well that it's just absurd. And there is no reason to be angry at something that is untrue. And thinking about a situation which is difficult, then you can analyze and think if there's something I can do. If there is something that you can do, then simply do it. If you have the tools, the means, the resources to make the situation better, then just put those to good use and transform that situation. In that case, anger is totally out of place. It doesn't make the situation any better. It doesn't add to the equation. But if there's nothing that you can do about it, then what's the point of getting angry? By getting angry, the thing will not go away. The situation will not improve. Actually, it will become worse. So why compound the suffering even more? Getting angry has no purpose. And it is quite useless because nothing can be done. Sometimes it's really hard to accept that things are just out of our control. But a lot of times they are. And that's fine. And when you're in a situation where you're having an argument or a fight with a person, then you can examine how you got involved in this situation. For instance, instead of just thinking that the other person is wrong, you can think about what you did that prompted the disagreement, or trying to understand why the other person is also upset, why the argument escalated. Seeing how it's not only your own perception of the situation, it's not your own perspective that is valid. You can bring in the aspect of how other people see things as well. And sometimes after we've engaged in a discussion or argument or verbal fight, we then hold a grudge. But this grudge, this perpetuation of anger, simply harms us. The action is done, the discussion is finished. Perhaps the other person has moved on already. And yet you'll see that the anger continues to harm you, to destroy your peace of mind. So trying to let go as much as possible of this very negative state of mind. Conclude by making a determination to observe your own mind. And if you notice that anger arises, to apply some of this antidote. Or at the very least, not to react at all. To keep yourself from this habit of reacting with hatred and hostility. Recognizing how anger harms you first and foremost. You would naturally want to let go of it. Gently coming out of the meditation. Dedicating the merit, the positive potential, the good energy that we created with this practice, with this meditation and this teaching. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored and find repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth and those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be free from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid and those bound be free. May the powerless find power and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. All right. So thank you everyone, as usual, for coming, for staying, and for doing the practice. And I hope that you have a very good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and that you come back tomorrow for more teachings, more practice, more meditation. So yeah, have a good one. Bye. Thank you all.